She found it at the bottom of a storm drain on the corner of Bleecker and West 4th Street in New York City, on a Tuesday morning in November, when the cold came early and the gutters ran dark with last night's rain. Rose Adeyemi almost walked past it. She was late for her shift at the records office, her coffee was getting cold, and the city had long since trained her to keep her eyes forward and her business to herself. But something made her stop. A flash of gold catching the thin morning light. She crouched down. Reached in. Pulled it out. A man's ring. Heavy. Solid gold. And on the inside of the band, 3 words engraved in script so small she had to hold it up to her eye to read them. Find me again. That was only the beginning. Because the ring wasn't just old. It was warm. And the dark stain covering the left side of it wasn't rust. Rose knew blood when she saw it. She had grown up around enough of it to know. She stood on that corner for a full 30 seconds, rain starting again, coffee going cold in her hand, and made the decision that would unravel the next 10 years of her life. She put the ring in her coat pocket and kept walking. If you've ever held something that felt like it belonged to you before you even knew whose it was, stay with me. Because what Rose found in that drain was not just a ring. It was the beginning of a question that a man named Caruso Vitale had been waiting a decade for someone to ask. Caruso hadn't lost the ring by accident. He had left it there deliberately on a cold October night 10 years ago, bleeding from a wound in his side that he hadn't told anyone about, standing on that exact corner, watching a woman he loved walk away from him for the last time. He had taken the ring off his finger, the ring his father had given him, the ring that carried the name of every man in his family who had chosen loyalty over survival, and he had dropped it into the drain. Not because he was giving up. Because he was making a promise. If she ever came back. If the city ever brought her back to that corner. The ring would be there. And so would he. 10 years later, Caruso Vitale was 41 years old, ran the most quietly powerful private security firm in New York, and had not moved his primary office from the building on Bleecker Street. 3 floors up. Corner window. Direct sightline to the storm drain below. His assistant Marcus had stopped asking why he always took the corner office in every building they worked from. He had stopped asking a lot of things. The morning Rose found the ring, Caruso was standing at that window with his coffee, same as every morning, when he saw her stop. He saw her crouch. He saw the flash of gold. He put his coffee down on the windowsill very carefully, the way a man moves when something enormous is happening and he cannot afford to drop anything. He watched her stand. Watched her hold the ring up to the light. Watched her read the inscription. Watched her put it in her pocket and walk away. His phone was in his hand before she reached the next block. Marcus. His voice was completely steady. Find out who she is. The woman in the red coat who just walked east on Bleecker. I need a name by noon. A pause on the line. Boss, how do you know she's not just, because she read the inscription? Another pause. Understood. Caruso hung up. He stood at the window for a long time after she disappeared around the corner, the street going on without her, ordinary and indifferent. 10 years. He had stood at this window for 10 years. And the city had finally sent her back. But what he didn't know yet, what would change everything, was why Rose had stopped. She hadn't stopped because of the flash of gold. She had stopped because she recognized the ring. She had seen it before. On the hand of the man she had loved and left a decade ago. On the hand of the only person who had ever called her by her full name and meant it like a prayer. She had spent 10 years convincing herself she didn't know where he was. She had spent 10 years being wrong about that. 2. Rose walked 6 blocks before she stopped under a scaffolding overhang, opened her fist, and looked at the ring again. Her hand was shaking. Find me again, she closed her fingers around it. And for the first time in 10 years, she turned around. 10 years ago, Rose Adeyemi was 29 years old, working nights at a hospital in Connecticut, and in love with a man her mother called dangerous and her own heart called home. Caruso Vitale had walked into the emergency waiting room on a February night with a cut above his eyebrow and someone else's blood on his jacket, and he had sat down in the chair beside her and said, without preamble, without performance, "You look like you've been here a long time." Rose had been there 7 hours. Her younger brother Eli had been in surgery. She was exhausted and frightened and completely out of patience for small talk. She told Caruso exactly that. He said, I know. I'm not making small talk. He sat with her for the remaining 4 hours without asking for anything in return. When the surgeon came out and told her Eli was going to be fine, Rose had cried with her face in her hands and Caruso had put his jacket around her shoulders without touching her and without saying a word. She had fallen in love with him in that waiting room. Not later. Right then. That was the truth she had spent 10 years trying to revise. What followed was 8 months that Rose could only describe as the specific terror of being completely happy. Caruso was careful with her from the very beginning in a way that men who had learned the world through violence often were, because they understood the weight of what they were holding. He called when he said he would. He showed up when she needed him to. He learned how she took her coffee without asking twice. He remembered every small thing she mentioned and treated none of it as small. But Rose had also known from the beginning what Caruso was and what he came from. His family's name opened certain doors in Connecticut and New York that had nothing to do with legitimate business. He never lied to her about it. He never dressed it up. He told her the truth about himself in fragments over those 8 months, each one a stone laid down carefully, watching her face for the moment she decided it was too much. The moment came on a cold October night. Not because of anything Caruso did. Because of what Rose saw. She had gone to meet him at his office building on Bleecker Street and arrived 40 minutes early and seen something from the sidewalk through the lobby glass that she was not meant to see. A man on his knees. Caruso standing over him. The specific posture of power that has stopped apologizing for itself. She did not go inside. She stood on that sidewalk in the October cold and understood with absolute clarity that the 8 months of gentleness and coffee and remembered details were completely real and that this other thing she was seeing, was also completely real. Both things were true. She could not hold both things. She called him from the corner. He answered on the first ring. He always answered on the first ring. She said, I can't do this. He was quiet for 3 seconds. She counted them. Then he said, Rose. Just one word. Her name. Like a question and an answer simultaneously. I saw you, she said. I know what I saw. Another silence. Then, I know. Not a denial. Not an explanation. Just, I know. She said, I have to go. He said, I know that too. She said, don't look for me. The silence that followed was the longest 3 seconds of her life. Then he said, I won't. And she believed him. And she had been right to believe him. Caruso had not looked for her. Not once in 10 years. He had not sent anyone to find her. Had not used the considerable resources available to him to locate a woman who had asked to be left alone. Because he understood that following her would be the one act that proved she had been right to leave. So he had done the hardest possible thing instead. He had stayed. He had stayed on Bleecker Street and he had stayed at the corner window and he had left the ring in the drain like a message in a bottle thrown into a city instead of an ocean. And he had waited. What Rose didn't know, what she was about to find out, was that the man she had seen on his knees in that lobby 10 years ago was not a victim of Caruso's power. He was the man who had been sent to kill her brother Eli in that Connecticut hospital. And Caruso had stopped him. He had been protecting her from the very beginning. And he had never told her. Rose stood outside the building on Bleecker Street at 11:47 in the morning with the ring in her closed fist and the rain starting again and absolutely no idea what she was going to say. The building hadn't changed. Same dark glass. Same brass lobby handles worn smooth at the grip. Same security camera above the door angled slightly down. She had noticed that camera 10 years ago and thought it was pointed at the street. She knew better now. She knew it was pointed at the drain. She pushed through the door. The lobby guard, a young man with careful eyes, looked up. She said, I'm here to see Caruso Vitale. The young man's expression didn't change but something behind it shifted. He said, your name? Rose Adeyemi. He picked up the phone. Spoke quietly. Listened. Set it down. 3rd floor, Ms. Adeyemi. Corner office. He already knew. Of course he already knew. She stepped into the elevator and the doors closed and she looked at herself in the polished metal surface, her red coat, her natural hair pulled back, the rain on her shoulders, the ring pressed against her palm, and said quietly to her own reflection, "You turned around. You actually turned around." The elevator opened. A man was waiting. Not Caruso. A slim, precise man in a dark suit who introduced himself as Marcus and whose eyes moved over her once with the efficiency of someone trained to assess threats and who apparently decided she wasn't one. He led her down a hallway that was quieter than office hallways usually were, the kind of quiet that comes from very good soundproofing and deliberate design, and stopped at a door at the end. He knocked once. A voice from inside said, "Come in." Marcus opened the door and stepped aside. Rose walked through. Caruso was standing at the window. His back was to her. He was looking at the street below, at the corner, at the drain, and he didn't turn around immediately. He gave her the seconds she needed to get her breath back. That was the thing about him she had forgotten and now remembered all at once. He had always given her the seconds she needed. He was broader than she remembered. The 10 years were in his shoulders, in the set of his jaw when he finally turned. There was a scar above his right eyebrow that hadn't been there before. His eyes were the same. Completely the same. Dark and steady and carrying something ancient that had no name in any language she spoke. He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back. Neither of them said anything. Then Rose opened her fist and held out the ring. Caruso's gaze dropped to it. Something moved through his expression, not surprise, not relief. Something older than both of those. He crossed the room in 4 steps and took it from her palm. His fingers brushed hers as he did. Neither of them acknowledged it. He looked at the ring. Turned it once. Read the inscription he had written himself a decade ago. Then he looked up at her. "You found it," he said. His voice was the same too. She had spent 10 years not thinking about his voice and now it was in the room and she understood why she had worked so hard not to think about it. "I found it," she said. 10 years is a long time to leave something in a drain. He turned the ring over in his hand. "I didn't think it would take 10 years. She felt something crack open in her chest at that. Not breaking, opening. Like a window that had been painted shut finally giving way. She said, "I recognized it. The moment I picked it up I knew it was yours." "I know. You knew I'd come. I hoped. There is a difference." He said it quietly and without apology. Rose looked at him, this man she had left, this man who had not come after her, this man who had stood at a window for 10 years, and felt the ground shift under everything she had decided about herself and him and the choice she made on a cold October night. She said, "There's something I need to tell you." He said, "There's something I need to tell you first." The thing he said next broke open everything she thought she knew about the night she left. And it changed. Nothing. And it changed everything. Caruso sat down. That was the first thing that surprised her. He sat, and gestured for her to sit too, and when she did the space between them was the width of a desk in 10 years and everything neither of them had said. He put the ring on the desk between them. Not on his finger. Between them. Like an object of evidence. Like something they both needed to be able to look at while they talked. He said, "The night you left. The man in the lobby." Rose's jaw tightened. She had spent 10 years sealing that image away behind every other thing she had built her life around. She said, "I know what I saw." "You saw me stop someone," Caruso said. "You didn't see why." She looked at him. His face was open in the way it only ever got when he had decided to tell her the complete truth and was prepared for what that cost. He said, "His name was Dario Cassano. He worked for a man in Connecticut who your brother Eli owed money to, not from gambling, not from anything Eli did wrong. From a loan he took when your mother was sick, 3 years before you and I met. The man who held that loan had decided Eli was too slow in repaying it. He had sent Cassano to the hospital in Connecticut to make sure Eli didn't leave alive." Rose's hands were very still on the desk. She said, "How do you know this?" "Because I found out 4 days before you came to my building that night," Caruso said. "I had been handling it. Quietly. Without telling you because I didn't know yet whether I could stop it without it becoming something worse for your family. The man in the lobby was Cassano. He had followed you from Connecticut to New York because you were the leverage point, because hurting you was faster than finding Eli." Rose's throat had closed. She said, "You stopped him." "Yes." She said, "And you didn't tell me." Caruso was quiet for a moment. "Then, I was going to tell you that night. You called before I came outside." She remembered the call. She remembered every second of it. She said, "You should have told me anyway." "You're right." He said it without defense. "I should have. I chose to handle it first and tell you after, and that was the wrong order, and by the time I understood that you were already gone." Rose stood up. Not in anger. She needed to move. She walked to the window, his window, the corner window, and looked down at the drain 4 stories below. A taxi went past. A woman with a yellow umbrella. The city, indifferent and continuous. She said to the window, "I spent 10 years thinking I left because I was smart. Because I saw something true about you and I made the right call." He said behind her, "You saw something true. What I am is true. What you saw was true." Rose turned around. She said, "But it wasn't the whole picture." "No." She said, "I had the whole story wrong." "Not wrong. Incomplete." He wasn't correcting her. He was being precise. There was a difference and she heard it. She came back to the desk. She looked at the ring sitting between them. She said, "What does it mean?" "The inscription. Find me again." Caruso looked at the ring for a long moment. He said, "It means that I knew if you ever came back you would need to be the one who chose to come back. Not because I found you. Because you found me. I couldn't follow you. You asked me not to and you were right to ask. But I could make sure that if you ever stood on that corner again you would have something to pick up. Something that told you I was still here." Rose's eyes were bright. She was not a woman who cried easily. She was not crying now. But she was close in the way that feels like standing at the edge of something vast and finally being willing to look down. She said, "I turned around 6 blocks away." He said, "I know. I watched you on the camera." She almost laughed at that. She said, "How long did you wait at that window this morning after you saw me pick it up?" He looked at her with the specific expression of a man who is not going to lie to the person in front of him even when the truth is enormous. He said, "I have waited at that window every morning for 10 years. That was when Rose finally understood the full weight of what she was holding. Not the ring. Him. The waiting. The decade of it. And the thing she had been carrying for 10 years, the secret she had told no one, pressed against the inside of her chest and demanded to be spoken. She said, "Caruso. There's something else." He looked at her. She said, "I came back to New York 8 months ago. I have been here for 8 months. And every morning I walk past that corner on my way to work. Every morning for 8 months I have looked at that drain. And I never stopped. Until today." His face didn't change. But his hands, flat on the desk, pressed down once, hard, and then went still. She said, "I need you to know that I was afraid. Not of you. Of this. Of this exact moment and what it would mean." He said quietly, "What made you stop today?" Rose looked at the ring on the desk. She said, "I don't know." He said, "I think you do." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "I was tired of walking past it." The phone rang at 2 in the afternoon. Caruso looked at the screen. His jaw shifted. He said to Rose, "I have to take this. Step outside." She shook her head. She stayed. He answered. The conversation was brief and entirely in Italian, which Rose did not speak, but she had spent 8 months of the last 10 years of her life relearning how to read the body language of a man who kept his face closed and his hands still. She read it now. Something was wrong. He ended the call. He put the phone down on the desk with the particular care of a man placing something he wants to throw. He said, "I need to tell you something about the present. Not the past." She said, "Tell me." "The man who sent Dario Cassano 10 years ago, the man your brother owed money to, his name is Renato Sessa." Caruso said it steadily. "He has been in federal prison in California for 9 years. He was released 4 weeks ago." Rose said, 4 weeks ago. "Yes." She said, "And?" Caruso looked at her. He said, and it appears that someone told him you were back in New York. She went very still. She said, how would anyone know that? Because Marcus found out this morning that Sessa has a man inside the records office where you work. That's how. The records office where Rose had worked for 8 months. The same building she went to every morning. The same building she had just been late to when she stopped at the corner drain. Rose said, my brother. Caruso was already picking up a second phone. He said, Marcus has someone in Connecticut with Eli right now. He's fine. He doesn't know anything is happening. She said, Caruso. He looked up. She said, why is Sessa still focused on my family? Caruso was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then he said, because 9 years ago, before he was arrested, he found out that it was me who stopped Cassano. And he knows that the only reason I involved myself in his business was you. So as far as Sessa is concerned, Rose finished it, I'm the way to get to you. Yes. She sat with that for a moment. The city noise came through the window glass. She said, so by coming here today you may have confirmed to whoever is watching you that you and I have contact, Caruso said. I'm sorry. I should have told you the moment you walked in. She said, would you have? If I had walked in and you had told me all of this in the first 10 seconds, would I still be sitting here? He looked at her steadily. He said, no. Probably not. She said, so you chose the right order this time. The corner of his mouth moved almost imperceptibly. He said, I'm learning. Rose stood. She went to the window again. Her window now, she had already started thinking of it that way, and that told her everything about where she was. She looked down at the street. She said, what happens now? Caruso came to stand beside her. Not close enough to touch. Beside her, in the way he had always positioned himself, close enough to matter, careful enough to wait. He said, that depends on what you want. She said, what I want. He said, you have a life here. A job. You've rebuilt something. I'm not going to ask you to walk into the middle of what I'm managing just because you found a ring this morning. She turned to look at him. She said, you waited 10 years. He said, I would wait 10 more. She said, Caruso. He looked at her. She said, I walked 6 blocks before I turned around. I have walked past that corner every morning for 8 months. Do you understand what I'm telling you? He looked at her with those dark still eyes that had been looking at her from a window for a decade. He said, I think so. She said, I'm not walking away again. Whatever this is, whatever Sessa is, whatever your world is, I'm not walking away from it or from you because I already know what that costs. I have paid that bill for 10 years. She picked up the ring from the desk. She held it out to him. Not as a returned object. As a decision. He looked at it in her palm. Then he looked at her face. He said, you understand what you're choosing. She said, I understand exactly what I'm choosing. This time I have the whole picture. He took the ring. He did not put it on his desk. He put it on his finger. And the specific exhale that left his body in that moment, quiet, controlled, 10 years long, was the most honest thing Rose had ever witnessed another person do. Renato Sessa made his move 3 days later. Rose had known he would. Caruso had known too. The difference between them and Sessa was that Sessa thought he was operating on information that was still good, that Rose was isolated, that Caruso would have to choose between protecting her and managing the exposure, that the choice would cost him something he couldn't afford. Sessa had spent 9 years in a California federal prison building a plan around a version of Caruso Vitale that was 10 years out of date. He did not account for Marcus, who had identified every one of his people in New York within 48 hours. He did not account for Rose, who was not the frightened woman who had stood on a sidewalk not knowing what she was seeing. She was a woman who had spent 10 years learning exactly what she was capable of and exactly what she was willing to protect. And he did not account for the fact that Caruso had spent 10 years becoming something more careful and more dangerous than the man Sessa remembered. The confrontation happened on a Wednesday morning on a quiet block in the West Village, when 2 of Sessa's men approached Rose on her walk to work, and the third one, the one positioned on the building roof above, found Marcus already there and had a conversation that ended the situation before it began. Rose walked the rest of the way to work with a single text from Caruso, handled. She typed back, I know. He sent back, how? She wrote, because you told me what to look for and I was watching. 3 seconds passed. Then, you're extraordinary. She put her phone in her pocket and kept walking. The federal case against Sessa reopened within a week, not through Caruso's direct involvement, which would have left threads, but through a careful package of documented information delivered to a specific prosecutor in Washington, D.C. by a source that Sessa would spend the rest of his trial trying to identify and never would. Eli Adeyemi drove down from Connecticut the following weekend not knowing any of what had happened, only that his sister had called him and said she wanted him to meet someone. He arrived at the apartment on Bleecker Street on a Saturday afternoon and shook Caruso Vitale's hand and said afterward, driving back to Connecticut, that he didn't know what he had expected from the man his sister had once left and never entirely stopped talking about without talking about him. He had expected something harder. Something colder. What he found was a man who had cooked dinner and who listened more than he spoke and who looked at Rose the way people look at things they have spent a long time being careful with. Eli called his sister that night and said, he waited for you. Rose said, I know. Eli said, 10 years, Rose. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I know, Eli. That's the part I'm still working out how to repay. Eli said, I don't think that's how he's thinking about it. She said, no. It's not. 2 weeks after Sessa's men were removed from the equation, Caruso and Rose stood at the corner of Bleecker and West 4th Street at 7 in the morning when the light was thin and the city was just beginning and the drain at the curb was empty and ordinary. He had asked her to come. She had known why without asking. They stood on the sidewalk and looked at the drain and she thought about a Tuesday morning in November with a cold coffee and a flash of gold. She thought about 6 blocks and a turn. She thought about 8 months of walking past the truth every morning because she was afraid of what it would cost to pick it up. She thought about a man at a window. She said, I'm sorry it took me 10 years. He said, you came back. She said, you stayed. He said, there was nowhere else I wanted to be. She looked at him on that corner in the early light, this man with the old scar and the ring back on his hand and the 10 years in his face, and she reached out and took his hand. Not dramatically. Not with ceremony. Just her hand in his on a street corner in New York City on an ordinary winter morning. He closed his fingers around hers. They stood there for a while. The city moved around them the way it always did, indifferent, relentless, full of other people's stories. But this corner was theirs. It had been theirs for 10 years without either of them standing on it at the same time. Now they were both here. And the waiting, his beautiful, terrible, decade-long waiting, was finally over. If this story found you at the right moment, share it with someone who needed to hear it today. Because some people don't chase. They stay. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to turn around, they're still there. This has been She Found His Bloody Ring. He waited 10 years for her to return. Until next time.